The timeline of the turmoil. When did Scott Walker decide that cuts to collective bargaining would be the centerpiece of his strategy to balance the state's budget?
Newly uncovered documents contradict what Walker told Congress. Fox 6's Mike Lowe has more in tonight's Political Lowdown.
The key question is this: did Governor Scott Walker plan to cut collective bargaining all along as a way to cripple the Democrats, or was he simply reacting to Wisconsin's fiscal crisis, trying to balance a budget with a bold move? In this discussion, the timeline is important. It's clear Walker campaigned in 2010 on job creation, not collective bargaining.
We can no longer live in a society where the public employees are the haves and the taxpayers who foot the bills are the have-nots.
It wasn't until a December 7, 2010 appearance at the Milwaukee Press Club that Walker signaled he was ready to play hardball over public employee contracts.
Anything from the decertify all the way through modifications to the current laws in place. But to us, the bottom line is we want to have a better ability to control what we do when it comes to wages and benefits.
And in the transition, he wrote to lame duck Governor Jim Doyle, telling him not to act on new labor contracts in the final days of his administration. Still, the lame duck legislature in 2010 was controlled by the Democratic Party, and it could have passed another labor contract. It appeared they would until Democratic Senate Majority Leader Russ Decker and fellow Democrat Jeff Plahey switched their votes and sided with Republicans. Walker introduced his collective bargaining bill in February of 2011, saying he wouldn't negotiate. It triggered a month-long protest, but the bill finally passed. The controversy, however, lingered.
Do you think, though, the problem comes from the fact that people didn't see this coming, in the sense that you didn't mention collective bargaining during the campaign?
Oh, we did. In fact, the unions I can point to a flyer the unions put out where they mentioned collective bargaining from my campaign team and the things that we put out.
But did you specifically talk about it?
Well, what I did throughout the campaign is say, to balance the budget without tax increases, we have to have wage and benefit reform. And I said any number of times when I was interviewed and on forums that I'm willing to look at the full range of options. So I didn't say on this day, at this time, I'll specifically do this. But there was no doubt I talked about the fact I was open to all these options.
In April of 2011, he was invited to testify before Congress.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm?
The governor appeared before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, where he was asked when he got the idea for Act 10.
In December, after the elections, but before I was sworn into office, the public sector unions in the state rushed to the lame duck session of the legislature and to the governor.
But newly uncovered records provided to Fox 6 show it was actually November when the Legislative Reference Bureau, the state office that essentially writes bills, was directed to start drafting what would become Act 10. An internal memo entitled Alternative Approach to Collective Bargaining sketched out plans to require unions to recertify every year and to prohibit them from collecting dues. An email spells out a strategy for prohibiting public employee unions from collectively bargaining over health care benefits. This was all before Walker had taken office. Democratic candidate for governor Tom Barrett says the documents raise questions about the December timeline Walker laid out before Congress.
Quite honestly, this is the first time I had heard that was in drafting in November. So I think it does go back to your question as to was he telling the truth when he appeared before Congress. I think that's another indication that he was not as truthful as he should have been at that time.
Can you enlighten us on the contradiction there and whether or not your testimony before Congress is accurate or the Legislative Reference Bureau is accurate?
No, we've looked at it for some time. As Lee Holloway pointed out last year, who's obviously not a political ally of mine, but that served with me as a county executive, said anybody who didn't see this coming hadn't been watching me for the last 8 years. What reaffirmed that for us, and where that's consistent with what I said in front of that congressional committee, is after the elections, but before I was sworn in, AFSCME and the other statewide public employee unions ran out to the lame duck legislature with a lame duck governor and tried to push through contracts that ultimately a couple Democrats in the state legislature voted against, figuring that the new legislative majority and the new governor should have a chance to be involved in that process. But each of those points aren't consistent with the other.
In Milwaukee, Mike Lowe, Fox 6 News.
Fox 6 is proud to help sponsor the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association gubernatorial debate. It's actually tomorrow night. It's between Scott Walker and Tom Barrett. It starts at 8 o'clock, and you can see it on TV6.2. That's Channel 986 if you have Time Warner, Channel 967 if you're on Charter Cable, and we'll also be streaming it live on fox6now.com.
They were hoping for justice and for closure.
Yeah, but they didn't get it. Right before the defendant was supposed